Okay, I'll call the meeting to order. We'll start with the assessor for roll call.
Larry Stein, present.
Miles Davidson.
Jerry Stone, Butch Freeman.
Brian Munn.
Carrie Bloomert, Marissa Treat.
Rick Warren.
Tommy Johnson III.
Notice of the meeting was properly posted on September 25th. And would the court clerk like to lead us in the pledge?
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. District 3.
Yeah, this is to clarify the action that was taken last week. The motion by Butch Freeman was to name Marissa Treat the supervisor for the purchasing department. The purchasing department, in front of you, you will see that the action taken by the budget board, the only no vote on that was PD Taylor. That was to hire Chantel Bozo as the purchasing director of the department created by the budget board. So if we are to move the purchasing department all under one person, we need to actually dissolve the budget board management and give that management entirely over to one person. So that's where we would have to clarify. Butch's, as Jerry and I have talked about, Butch's motion to do nothing but make her the supervisor is to essentially make sure and check off on her time.
And point of clarification, it was not to make me the supervisor. It was to move it under the county clerk's office, which is what the agenda item says. If we wanted to do the point person, then I actually wouldn't have taken it because that's a very different conversation. And that is not what was discussed in the meeting last week.
So I guess I misheard that Butch's motion where he says to make Marissa Treat the supervisor. That's my motion.
The agenda item also clearly says moving the county purchasing under the county clerk's office. So that is the direction that we took last week.
Okay.
If we want to change that, then we can have that discussion.
I think that's open for everybody else to discuss. I just wanted the clarification to this because I did not and still do not believe that that was one, the intent, two, the motion. I thought the motion was pretty clear.
Well, again, I can speak to Butch's intent. I know his intent.
Your microphone's
I know his intent was to move purchasing into the county clerk's office. I mean, that was his intent. So
There you go. So if that was the intent, then if there's a change that everybody chooses to do, we can vote on that or not. But now that we have the clarification of what the intent was, then we can go from there.
So what is the intent of your agenda item?
To clear the problem of what we misunderstood. I'm not the only one that had a misunderstanding of the way this thing went. In fact, a request from the DA's office and going and sitting down with the DA's office, they weren't even sure what happened. So, and thought rightfully that most of the people that were voting probably didn't know what the exact intent was. So this is to clarify exactly what the intent was.
Madam DA, do you think that we need to revote? Is that what your feelings are?
I have no opinion on whether there needs to be a revote. When I was approached last week about the action that was taken, it was presented during that discussion that there could be two different ways to interpret the ultimate vote of the board. But that's a question of fact that we don't determine. So if the board is comfortable with its understanding of the action that was taken last week, then that's for this board to determine.
I know we all sat here and listened to Butch's motion, but can you refresh my memory on literally word for word what his motion was last week?
The last motion he made was to make Marissa Treat the supervisor of purchasing department.
Those are the words he said.
Those were the words.
Okay.
But you can only act within the confines of the agenda item.
We can also only act within the confines of statute. And it doesn't say anything about naming a supervisor inside the planning department statute. That's Dillon's rule, of which we've operated under since 1865. It was decided.
So in your agenda item, do you think it's worded to transfer it the way it's worded?
Well, possible action as listed.
So it would satisfy,
Action may be amending, approving as amended, deferring, denying, giving instructions to staff, making a recommendation to another public body, receiving documents, presentations, referring to committee, reconsidering, reopening, returning, or striking. So those are the actions that have publicly been listed and that we may be able to take on this item.
so you're comfortable within the confines of the way your item is worded. If we revote, it would affirm for your satisfaction.
Yep.
Okay.
What is the motion?
So the way you would feel like it'd be comfortable to you is if it said that we vote to move the purchasing department formally to revert back to the clerk's office.
Yes, if you would, if this board would like to make that dissolution, because I think you have to dissolve the department that was created by this board.
Can you do both in the same vote? One is to dissolve and one is to move it to Ms. Treat.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
All righty. Would somebody care to make that motion? If we even feel like it's necessary.
Would it be appropriate to come from the treasurer's office since this was originally
I mean,
his
that same
motion?
motion as last week. Would it make it a little better?
No, that's,
No,
that's
don't
why
do-
we're here.
don't do
It's-
last week. That's
don't
why
do
we're
last
here.
week.
Yeah, okay. We move that the purchasing department be moved from the budget board back under and into the county clerk's office as allowed by statute.
And dissolve from the budget board.
Well, I don't know if you have to say dissolved or not, but the budget board won't be there.
I totally
won't
agree.
be over
but
them anymore. It will, they will be
We
under
just
the
don't
county
want to keep
clerk's office.
repeating this.
Yes, yeah, so that's pretty clear that it would be dissolved and it would be under the control of one person.
All
Okay,
right.
that's fine.
That's your motion. Is there a second?
Second.
All right. Any other discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
No,
You voted no?
What was the vote?
I voted yes. I tried to.
What was the
it
vote?
was
Take a
4-4.
roll call.
Yeah. Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? No.
No. No.
So you voted no. Oh, okay. All right. So given that the item is a deadlock, where do you think that the department is now, in your opinion?
In my opinion,
Yeah. You think it's
Hold you
back
to it.
to the budget board?
I would assume it goes back to the budget board because we were clarifying the vote that we took last week. And given the clarification, it didn't pass. Would you say that's correct?
Yes. So the budget board determined the fact that it wasn't clear with this motion, of which the DA said that it is a determining fact. So by making the motion, we have determined the fact. The fact was it wasn't clear. The second fact is that we can't come to a consensus. It's 4-4.
Well, we all agree that Chantel's done a great job with it. She's had a misstep, but
Absolutely.
a great job. And now Ms. Treat in this last few days has done a bunch of things that are very positive. She's gave her assistance, which she can do without hiring more staff. What she's doing right now is she has giving her so that the grants and different things that we can make phone calls, make research, and possibly get some passed that we haven't been able to do, maybe because they haven't had the staff. But having it under the budget board, and none of us has done any management of it. Even Butch admitted that he was just a point man, and actually we're all her boss. So it seems that it's more difficult having this many people run something than one person being totally responsible for it. So I don't know, do we move it to Ms. Treat's office like it is already moved? It's still under the budget board, but she is the manager of it. Butch was. She understands that if it's in her office and she's signing off on the pay, she's responsible. And then she has to
Well, we're all
answer.
responsible
We're all
by statute.
responsible, but she's the direct contact and is still in charge of it. And if there's any questions, we all have a right to
Well, that's just it. So what we haven't done in the past and what we should move to
is do our job.
we're 100% transparent with this setup. So Chantel should be giving all of her bosses a monthly report about what we've done. Same thing with her staff, with Nikki, so on and so forth. And if there is a staff issue that arises that has caused this discussion, if that happens, we have the means to go into executive session and for all of us to make that decision, for all of us to be informed.
I totally
Not-
agree, but what you're not seeing is Chantel, when she has somebody off sick, now she's down to 2 people. Having it in Butch's office, if Butch had been supervising or actually been doing it instead of just point man, Ms. Treat would actually be her supervisor, her direct super. We're all her bosses. But it's just like in my company, I have the top and I have people down the line. I don't go run the bulldozers and tell them how to drive them.
Yep.
So what we need is somebody that's directly over her. She's a second deputy, basically, directly over her, and she will give her day-to-day directions. More than get a monthly report's fine. That's
Well, her-
good. We can all get one, or you can make a monthly report at the budget board. She can stand up like the others and give us a monthly report, but there has to be direction here.
Her day-to-day directions are actually written in statute of what she can and can't do. And then everybody comes to her and everybody uses her as a single source to do bids.
But
Now, this
she-
department has worked.
She needs
swimmingly.
extra help. So do you want her to hire more employees rather than utilizing what we've already got? Because we're scraping to get money now for different things. So to do the research on these grants to get them to pass finally.
Which is what
Treat's
we're-
office could definitely do that.
So what we're doing with grants and stuff, your first year is the most difficult. And when myself and Cody and a few others sat on BET and said, hey, we need a grant person. Everybody agreed at that point, yes, we need a grant person. Let's put it under purchasing. It should probably be its own department, but let's hire one and get the ball rolling. Because here's the deal about grants. You continuously apply for grants. It is very rare that you get the grant on year one. That's what we know. That's what we have set up for. That's what BET we discussed. That's what BET we funded. We know that we will need to supply Nikki herself with more individuals, of which I'm more than willing to take money out of my highway funds and do infrastructure grants all day long to help her out. But keeping it as an individual that has 7 sets of eyes, keeping it away from an elected official, the purchasing department, of where the 1980s problems caused and started, it's not Marissa that we have a problem with. We have to react responsibly for those in the future. It's pretty simply, but putting it, and I get it, we could put it under her and we could always take it out later. Well, we just did that.
So, point clarification, since the vote tied, the vote last week still stands.
And the
So,
vote last
as
week was to
I
make you the
would
supervisor.
understand, is that the purchasing department was moved under the county clerk's office. And that is the direction that we took. And I've already been in the middle of,
Yeah,
we
we
did
just
it because-
reversed that by fact,
it died. The motion died. So last week's vote would still stand.
but that was a clarification of last week's.
But the vote last week still
Was to name you the
stands.
supervisor.
And it didn't. Yes, I am the supervisor. I'm the supervisor of about 45 people. Supervisor, manager, leader, all sorts of different names there. But what we voted on and what the intent was, I did talk to Butch several times, was to move the purchasing department underneath the county clerk's office.
which would require a completely separate motion to dissolve the purchasing department that was created by the budget board for transparency.
Okay. Well,
So,
last week vote
if you
still
would like to-
stands. It is still underneath the county clerk's office, and that is the way we will move forward.
If we're gonna move forward with it under your direction, then we're just gonna dismiss the fact that the wording of an actual motion of which we just understood as a board that we did not understand that motion and that we did not understand that.
Did we
intent.
really all walk away not understanding that the purchasing department was housed under the clerk's office? I mean, did we really walk away thinking that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Everyone
That's why I
here walked
literally walked
away
into the DA's
thought
office.
that, so where did we think it went?
I mean, here, it was the discussion with Jerry just a second ago. His intent wasn't. And then in that discussion, no, his intent was. So, I mean, and that was just the discussion just a second ago.
Butch's intent was to move purchasing under the county clerk's office.
Okay.
That was its intent. I mean, that's what he told me several times.
No, that was, so the discussion now is that the intent was. But as we were discussing it, he was like, no, his intent wasn't to dissolve it. And then we talked about it and he clarified, no, the intent was to dissolve it. So
We had a very long discussion last week about the pros and cons, and then we took a fair vote.
And then this vote did not pass, so last week's vote stands.
And then that would mean that the purchasing department is underneath the clerk's office.
Okay.
I agree with the clerk. Does anybody else wish to speak?
So just for clarification, the vote last week stands because this vote did not pass. So just want to make sure that's clear.
Okay. Item 2. Madam Clerk.
Yes, this is to move to make Carrie Hudson, who's my chief deputy, as my alternate on BET. Micah is tremendously talented, and I want her to be able to focus on being able to provide data to all of the different departments. I've watched the BET meeting both in person and live, and she has quite a bit on her shoulders and being able to respond to each department and getting numbers in and having to adjust numbers very quickly. And so I think it's fair to her to not also have to remember what my vote is that day or my position that day. So she still would be the staff person in the room. This just makes Carrie the alternate if Mr. Nelson could not be present.
Motion to approve.
Second?
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Mr. Cody.
Good morning. All right, BET went back to work this week, looked at our previous recommendation, and we actually have 2 recommendations for you today. For whatever reason, only one of those recommendations was attached to your agenda. There's actually 2. I think you might have another one passed out for you. I was told that you would. You put one up there. Okay. So BET made 2 recommendations for clarification. Both recommendations were fairly identical to our previous recommendation. There were just a few modifications. So what I'll go over with you guys, if it's okay with you, is just the modifications we kind of went through, kind of line by line last time. So what I'll discuss right now are the changes. First of all, there is in both our recommendation, there is a component of a 2.5% increase for salaries. Those 2.5% numbers were associated with a COLA at our last recommendation. Now they're associated with a merit-based pay increase. So it would be up to each elected official's determination of where those salary dollars would go within their department. Okay. We went ahead and changed our recommendation to reflect the clerk's request that their increase for both 2.5% and their medical premium increase be taken out of our recommendation and added to the reserve. We made that change as well, and that is reflective in both of our recommendations.
Is that the 1.927?
I'm sorry.
Is that the 1.927 number for reserve?
Well, that is one of our recommendations. So I'm just kind of going over the difference between those two documents. So far, what I've mentioned are the similarities of both of the recommendations. The one change or difference, if you will, between the two documents in front of you, one of them, which Mr. Stein just mentioned, that would leave a $1,927,309 balance in reserve, reflects a 2.5% merit for county, as well as an increase for the detention center budget. That 2.5% merit for detention is $406,458. It's a little different than the $463,000 number that we talked about last week, and that's just because there was a formula issue in Excel when it calculated those from before. The recommendation that reflects that $1.9 million balance in reserve, the 2.5% merit for county is $1,145,333. Okay. The other recommendation is identical to this one, with the exception of it pulls the 2.5% merit out for allocation to the jail and redistributes that $406,000 down into the reserve account. So those are our two recommendations. Like I said, they are very, very similar to our previous recommendation, just with those modifications.
All right, discussion.
So clarify that where is the 2.5% merit on page A includes every one of the different entities that we're talking about?
Yes, sir.
And then on the second one with the balance with the reserve of 1.9 million, that deletes which?
No, that's the opposite of what you just said.
Yeah. The what's the other one on the reserve balance?
2.3.
The 2.3 reserve balance would indicate a budget that does not allocate an additional 2.5% for the jail.
Okay.
So that's that one. The one that's a little bit less, the 1.9 million, would be reflective of an increase in 2.5% merit for general fund as well as the jail.
And which one of those are reflected? We have three different options. We have the original, and then we have,
So I
think,
believe,
B and C.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I believe we're just hearing the report for item 3, and the item 4 is when we discuss and vote on the 3 options. Is that correct?
Well, 3 is our recommendation. Our recommendation, our 3 is our recommendation. There's only one of those listed there. Both of those recommendations are listed in item 4. And Mr. Stein, you are correct. The attachment, the very first attachment that I guess would be option A, it doesn't say option A. There's no option listed, but that one is a 2.5% across the board for county and jail. Option B is a 2.5% increase for county only and not the jail. And option C was not discussed in BET. It is a reflection of no 2.5% is my understanding. I can't speak to much more of option C than that because that was not discussed and vetted in BET.
So just Larry, the paperclip document we were handed, the top one is a 2.5% merit for only county employees. The second page is a 2.5% merit for county and jail employees.
And once again, I apologize for that confusion. Both of those should have been attached.
Which line is the jail trust there? Did I miss it?
The jail trust, we fund that via a contract that's paid for out of the general government account.
Okay.
So if you look at those two documents, the general government BET recommendation, one of them is $41,149,740. The other one is $406,458 less than that. the funding for the jail comes out of that particular line item. And that's where we do a lot of the contracts. So like our OSU extension contract is paid for out of there, the district attorney's contract, and our lease agreements that we pay on behalf of, for instance, the sheriff at Krause and the election board at Lincoln and others, other county departments that are using PBA properties. Those are all funded out of that account as well.
And option C was provided in case there wasn't a COLA so that we could still meet our deadline by the end of the month. I believe is why option C was included, just for this documentation.
Okay, so that's your report, correct?
Yes, sir.
So
All right.
I'll move to receive the report and recommendation from the BET.
All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
And before we vote on item 4, the jail administrator I see is here. Do you care to speak? Ms. Garner, are you here to speak to us?
I actually have Chris Sherman, our new Chief Financial Officer, is here to answer any questions that you guys might have regarding our budget at the jail. And of course, I'm here to answer any other operational questions that you might have. So.
I do think, Larry, did you want to ask some of those questions you and I
Sure
were
do.
just talking about?
Chris,
Morning.
it was a pleasure to meet you the other day.
Yes, sir.
I have a underlying question of how much money do we receive from the different communities that are part of Oklahoma County that use our jail? How much do they pay us?
As far as, you mean, I'm not sure about.
Are you referring to our municipal contracts?
Right, is it a per night or is it a flat fee? Or who negotiates that and how do we get to a rate of, I don't know, approximately $50 a day?
Historically, it's done by contract or an MOU. This last year was a little bit different because of the changeover in the administration of the trust and trying to negotiate that contract right in the middle of all of that. It didn't end up going on a per diem. They just gave us a flat $500,000. But I will say that we are in the process of calculating our cost of incarceration, and we'll be utilizing that moving forward in negotiations with Oklahoma City, which I hope to be finalized by the end of October.
Previously, those have been determined by the district court. Has that changed?
The cost of incarceration,
Right.
it is absolutely determined by the district court. However, it's on us to present the information as far as what the actual costs are of incarceration.
The question that continues to remain for me is you have, according to the news story, you had $1.1 million left over and you're wanting $422,000 to provide this merit pay for your employees. And then you opined about your inability to pay salaries, but we don't control your salaries you pay, you control that.
Correct. He can answer some of those questions for you as far as how we ended up in that position at the very end of the year. But what I can assert is that it did not come out of the county's general fund. That was all stuff that we basically profited from. So he can give you more information on that specifically though.
Yeah, the reason for the large balance at the end of the last FY was twofold. We get our money for commissary, inmate phones, those types of things at the end of the month, which is about $400,000 to $450,000. Well, also what happened is we did not receive our full payment from Oklahoma City until the last day of the fiscal year, which was $500,000.
Okay.
So
So what happens to that $500,000?
well, we've done a lot of things. We had several things, or 3 things on the watch list that we just paid for out of those funds. The mold abatement and repainting of the pods, we're using that money to pay for those things as well. And we also, there was a Department of Health settlement for $175,000 that we paid for.
So you're saying that you don't have enough money to be able to cover the merit pay?
No, sir.
And how much, in the last few months with your lower number of employees, how much has been built up because you don't have those employees, or how much has it not cost you because you're using overtime instead of hiring employees?
Well, I mean, it's not necessarily a wash, but with the amount of overtime that we're paying, that's where we're using the majority of that money is to pay overtime
We've funded
salaries.
you for approximately 60 more employees than you have, correct?
Correct, and we're about to have a 30-man academy starting on Monday. So
Okay.
our goal is to get to the 320, which is the number that was set, and we're not trying to go over that, and we just want to try to get there for our people.
So we funded you for more employees, and does that not pay for some of the merit pay that we're talking about from the county? I mean, if you're getting additional funds, and maybe you're using some of it for overtime, but the issue is that you've got a lot more money than you're spending, and you could be using that to offset these costs that we're having to incur.
Well, we're already using this money to offset costs that the county would normally incur. So, I mean, we're using this money to run the jail and to pay for things that we would normally come back and ask the county for.
Look forward to more visits.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Further questions?
No, Commissioner, I'd like to make a motion that we would approve option A, which is the 2.5% merit increase for county and jail trust employees.
Second.
Okay, well, discussion, and I have some. I wanted to say that my concern about this, as I've mentioned before, is that, we have a small reserve. I appreciate that we've forward funded some aspect of some of the costs that got us in a bind at the end of the fiscal year last year, but I also think those wild cards are still in place to possibly be inflatable. Also, I also think we enjoyed a relatively mild winter and summer, all things considered, and our full realization of those utility cost increases could still be absorbed by our reserve fund if we're not careful. Farmer's Almanac's calling for a harsh winter. Whoever knows, but the point is that if you don't have the money there, it's not there. And in looking at the need for employee retention and salaries, I get it, and I appreciate that the BET at least took this into consideration and allowed it to be merit instead of a COLA. Gives at least some of the departments some flexibility with that, but I still think that we have only a few options to us in terms of being able to reserve what we spend, most of which what we have to expend is not in our control, like utilities and so forth. So I'm against it for that reason. Any other discussion?
Hey, Cody, just real quick. Department 240, did we move that money to the clerks, or what did we do with the purchasing department money?
It was,
No, it's a standalone budget. We did not.
the treasurer's office believed that it was just all things operated the same. We checked on that. That's why there weren't additional agenda items.
We wouldn't have to follow up at a subsequent budget board meeting with an item to transfer out of that budgeted category into the clerk's
We-
office?
Felt like it, in talking to Micah, that I believe Christie, that we didn't need to make that move, especially this year. We would just keep it separate in its own.
And Christie's
fund,
back there if you want to
And that we
speak.
wouldn't merge it in this year, but we could look at what the future is, but we don't have to take it. So it's not commingled into the clerk's office. It's still standalone.
So our reserve number is actually, let me get this right, about $600,000 difference? If we're just gonna leave that sitting in that one department, we're not using those funds, right?
I don't understand.
Where are we using those funds?
No, right now, they're still using the funds. Right now, it has stayed with the purchasing. Now, we can come back and do an item and transfer. We can absolutely do that. When Christy and Carrie and then Micah spoke, my understanding from that conversation, and I believe Amber was also part of that discussion, was it was best at this time to just leave that fund as it is, especially given that we're in the middle of the budget cycle. And then at a later point, we can change it. It really doesn't matter to me what we do. And talking to Chantel about the needs that they have, I was going to purchase their computers out of our fund, not their fund. So there could potentially be some funds remaining in purchasing that could be moved, but we were trying to make it as easy and as possible through the transition. But we can certainly come back and discuss that at a later point.
Christie, do you want to add to that?
I think my only comments on it was with the treasurer's office, it didn't have to move, but I was talking about cash. General fund cash, I think you do have to move the appropriations.
Micah?
I never said not to.
So like the assessor's office has two departments in general fund. We control, our office controls like excise, auditing, and county clerk. So my understanding was with the vote last week was that the department itself would go under Madam Clerk, but that it would still be just a sub-department in general fund. Just like auditors and excise, and they have their own budgets, but
We don't,
So we could move for, what I'm hearing is we could move forward with approving the budget today, and you all will bring a trailer item to make clear the paper trail.
We could definitely do that, yes. Yeah. Right.
well, it seems just,
Is there any other discussions or questions?
And I do have one, Cody, sorry. I know, yeah. One of the reasons that our reserve is a little bit lower this year is because we took some action to shore up some things that we've typically waited till later in the year to do. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And last year when we had an issue that needed to raise some cash, the budget board, through their wisdom, was able to come up and meet those needs, correct?
That is also a correct
And we would
statement.
also have that option in the event we were to have an emergency situation later in the year.
I think that's always an option.
Thank you.
And specifically, it's $950,000 that we are pre-funding this year instead of letting sit in a watch list.
Okay, thanks.
I think all I'd like to say is that I do agree. I think that we should hold off on doing the increase and put them on the watch list, both for county employees and for the jail trust. I think we can look at that later on. We have a lot of things that we're responsible for taking care of. The jail, we have a whole watch list available. I think that our salary increase should be put on the watch list. So I will be voting no for this item today.
I think that it's important to remember that we could always provide a stipend at the end of the year, so we wouldn't be increasing the base costs of the county. We can reserve that money until then. And I tell you what really bothers me is we don't have a vote on just the county employees. I prefer to do that first and then talk about what we do down the road for CJAC or the jail trust. And, you know, there's plenty of options. Yeah, that option B rather than this first option here.
I'm just following the instructions my elected official.
I understand. And I don't like it.
Okay. Did you rise because you have something to say? Just wanted to give Larry the stink eye.
I think exploring the possibility of putting this on a watch list, I think it's well intended, but it's short-sighted when it comes to being able to adequately staff the jail because we have a retention issue, obviously, and I understand that's not all financial related. We're working on all the other items that are related to retention, like leadership and whatnot, but we also have a recruiting issue. And as we're trying to overcome the negative press that we have had over the last several years, it is making it very difficult for us to recruit qualified individuals for this position. And we are arguably the worst jail in the state, and I feel like we need to be able to compete with newer facilities with lower populations. That's all I have to say.
That kind of a vote doesn't mean, it means not now. It doesn't mean not ever.
I understand.
That's what we're trying to do is to let you, we don't have control of money when it goes over there. And if you've got the control, you can do the things that you need to do, and you can always come back and say, I've just hired 10 more employees, or I'm planning on hiring 10 more employees. I need money now. And just like J.G. Wentworth, it will appear.
I understand that. I think what we would need clarification on is, are we allowed to advertise if you were to do that at the higher rate for recruiting purposes? There wasn't a lot of clarification that was given on that.
Well, if you're paying overtime, what's the variable on what providing the pay that's needed to be competitive in the job market? I mean, that's a decision that I think that anybody would be able to make a rational determination on what the salary should be for a starting jailer. If we can't get anybody at a certain level, and I'm looking at you saying cadet starts at 38,000. How many cadets do you need? How many sergeants do we have? How many lieutenants? How many captains do we have? I mean, if we're looking at trying to be able to pay more for the folks who are entering the service, if we want to start at $40,000 or thereabouts with the benefit package and everything else, perhaps that would put it over the edge, and you'd be able to get more people.
That's the hope.
Yeah, and I think you could pretty well do that if with the available funds that you have. And then if, you know, we've got our general fund dollars that we're putting in reserve, and it doesn't mean it's going away. It just means it's in a different position of allocation and appropriation. And I'd rather you use the funds you have and do what you need to be, and then help us do a better job as well, because those funds, we want to prove to the public and we want to prove to everybody else that we're managing the dollars as best we can. Because when they see that you're sitting over on 1.1 million, that's what the story says. And we know what, you know, everybody's going to believe that. And if that's the case, and then you want an additional $422,000, it seems that there's this churn that's going on that doesn't make sense to, I don't know if it would be readily understandable to the general public. They'd say, why are you paying $422,000 more when the jail trust is sitting on money? And I think it's a legitimate question. And if we would be able to do more discussions about that and get some better answers. But right now, it just doesn't make any sense to me and to others.
I understand that. I understand that. It's just the fact of the matter is that those profits at the end of the year are, you know, you can't really budget for them.
Right.
You never know where they're going to land. And knowing that we have a viable source of income, so we can not only advertise, but give people the raises that, you know, they need in order to keep up with the cost of living. That's kind of my whole purpose for speaking.
Okay. Any other discussion? There's a motion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. No.
I'm not getting the vote button. Aye.
Okay. Motion passes. All right. Item 5. Madam Clerk. This is our budget.
Brian, wait a second. That was on Joe's right, funded all across the board, okay.
Pardon?
That's right.
No, it's fine. It passed 5-3. Okay, this is our budget. Then item 5.
Motion to approve.
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. No. Five to 3. Item 6, create a new line item. Cody?
Yes, this was part of our recommendation, which was a $500,000 increase into the capital projects fund to fund the Judicial Chamber Security Project next door. This $500,000, based on your action a minute ago, setting the budget, put $500,000 into capital. This particular agenda item would create a line item for this specific project, move the money from the general capital account into this line item so that work and contracts and
Motion to
whatnot can be
approve.
moved forward.
Motion to approve the unfunded mandate
Whatever you did.
from the state.
I'll second.
Waiting until the clerk can fix the computer glitch here.
It's still doing the same thing. Because of a motion?
Yes, sir.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Item passes. Any citizens to speak? Seeing none, any board comments? Assessor?
No.
Anybody? All right, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.